I have always tried, and I've said this a bunch of times, I think even Craig's talked about me before, I've always tried in my studies to step into the biblical authors and audiences' shoes, see through their eyes. I think that is the most advantageous way to understand the scripture. So today, I want to nerd out with everybody, and I know not everybody's as nerdy as I am, so I'm trying to keep it palatable.
I'm pretty nerdy.
Noted. So I want to take you guys on an adventure of nerdiness that I have been kind of slightly obsessing over the last couple of years. I want to talk about the biblical creation story, Genesis 1 and 2 and 3 and so on, as it compares to other nations' creation stories, other mythologies about creation. It's going to be the first part of a short series that I'm going to do. I'm going to try to get through it in a reasonable amount of time. There's a lot to cover here. If I'm going too fast or if you want me to repeat something, feel free to ask, but I'm just going to say, eventually you're going to get hungry. So, you're going to experience, I'm just going to tell you this right now, you're going to experience information overload. If you're taking notes, give yourself a break. You're not going to remember everything that I cover. You're just not. There's just way too much, and you don't need to. You don't need to remember all the names and all the figures and all the things. I want you to follow the patterns. I want you to see, as we go through each of these stories and compare things, you're going to see, okay, this sounds like this, sounds like this, sounds like this. Now we're going to go over here. Oh, we got the same pattern, okay? That's the focus. As we go through this, again, for those that are not as nerdy as myself, you may feel like this is not the most important subject in the world. It might feel pointless or tedious. I promise you, if it hits you even close to how it hit me, you just take the time, soak it in, you will find it so valuable as you go through your Bible on your own. After you leave here, you go home and read by yourself, or however you take in the Bible, you're going to find this theme just shows up over and over and over and over again. We are completely ignorant to it because we don't live in ancient Israel. So, and in the meantime, if you are nerdy like me, it's quite interesting. Also, because I just want to put this on the table right up front before I get into this, because I am focusing on the creation account, I just want to say right now, I'm not touching the whole story of, young Earth, old Earth, evolution. I'm not going there. So if that's what you're getting out of what I'm saying, just put it aside. We're not going there. So let's actually get started. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. You guys ever heard that before? Where's that at? Anybody? Any rough guess?
That's just one.
Like literally the first thing. Okay. So, what do you think of when you read the beginning chapters of Genesis? Let's paint me a picture. Draw me a drawing. What do you see when you see creation?
Everything.
Okay.
Raw land.
Okay.
God spoke and it just happened.
Okay.
God made stuff and then he made stuff out of stuff.
Okay. But paint me a picture. What would it look like? Give me a photograph.
Give me some painting.
Animals, camels, and cats in mine.
Okay. Earth, okay.
I feel like it's like an old tube light, like an old TV picture tube where it's black. Everything's just dark. You turn it on and then you slowly start to see that light open up and then everything just kind of starts to form from the old TV.
Okay. Fair. Fair, okay. I gotta say I'm a little impressed. I expected some different answers, but most people, when you ask them if they've ever read Genesis, if you ask them to paint them a picture, and I'm not picking on anybody, but if you ever looked at Answers in Genesis or something, they have their diagram of the creation, and it's all kind of focused on a globe, and then stuff happens to the globe, and that's usually the kind of picture that people talk about. They see an Earth out in space, and that's where it starts, because that's what we grew up understanding the physical universe to look like. We live on a globe. I'm not saying we live on a flat Earth either, don't think that. But,
Thank you.
now, if someone wants to believe that, that's your business, but that's not mine. But when you paint that picture, most people paint that picture of the early days of creation. It's something like that. There's a globe in space, and stars start to form around it, and then things happen on it. And so what I want to go through as we go through, what I want to show you as we go through this is the ancient people of Israel and other nations didn't have that picture. They didn't understand the concept of a globe. They didn't understand, the universe as we do. So I want to go through this exercise to learn to see through their eyes. See through the eyes of a people that lived 35-ish, 100 years ago on the other side of the planet, spoke a foreign tongue. Completely different culture. Genesis, like the rest of the Bible, was written from the perspective of the ancients to whom and by whom it was composed. To the ancient mind, Genesis 1:1 might read something a little more like, in the beginning, God created the sky and the land. That's what they saw of the universe. There was no globe. There was no, trillions of stars out in vast space. There was up there and there was down here. And God made that. That's how they understand the physical universe. Also, Genesis, much like the rest of the Bible, was not written in a cultural vacuum. The authors were aware of their own cultural stories and characters, and they allude to them often as they compose these texts. So with all of that in mind, all those things, stay with me, do you think it's possible that there might be just a little bit of nuance of communication that we are missing? It would be rude and foolish for you to travel across the world, even in the same era of time, and wherever you land, to expect the people there to speak American English and hand you a cheeseburger. It's just not how this works. Ancient cosmology, or the understanding of the physical universe, was based entirely around what they saw around themselves. So I'm going to give you guys permission to play on your phone. Get your phone out, or whatever you got. Do an image search for Hebrew cosmology. I'll give you a second.
All the Verizon people can't.
Sorry?
All the Verizon people can't.
Oh, Verizon people can lean over to AT&T or something. Well, for those who can, sorry, I didn't think about that. For those who can, you're going to see a whole bunch of pictures that most of them are pretty much the same of this, the flat Earth. Again, I'm not saying the Earth is flat, but this is the way the ancients understood things. You're going to see a flat disk Earth surrounded by a dome, standing on pillars in water and around water. That's the way they saw the universe. Some of those things we're going to touch on as we keep going. But what I want to point out right now, as we look at this Hebrew cosmology, and if you are looking at the picture and things are labeled, you probably recognize a lot of these phrases like, windows of heaven, the pillars of the earth. These are things that we hear in the Bible, right? What's fascinating about this, and where I want to start here, is that God spoke to these people in the, what's the word I'm looking for? He spoke to them in the context of the world that they understood. When he describes creation to them, he's not fixing their cosmology. He's not telling them, well, actually, the earth really isn't on pillars and there really isn't windows in heaven. He doesn't go there. He doesn't care, because the Bible is not about science, right? And I say this as someone who 10 years ago would have absolutely said the opposite, and did say the opposite very fervently. It's been a long journey. But so let me make my case. As a parent, I can tell my young child to look both ways before crossing the street because I love them and I want them to be safe. Right? That's what most people would do if they have any sense. Or I can tell my child to look both ways before crossing the street because there are vehicles moving on the road. These vehicles have a greater mass than the child and are moving at a high velocity, which if my child were to impede the vehicle's path, this would cause a redistribution of kinetic energy that would result in significant damage to my child's physiology, which in turn could cause devastating effects to their immediate as well as their long-term well-being, which they may find inadvisable for future endeavors. Which method is it that God employs in the Bible?
Simple.
He's not giving us a science lesson. He's teaching us things that matter like a loving father should. A good parent does not need to try to teach their 4-year-old a complex lesson in physics to cross the street. Neither does God need us to learn the complex mechanisms of creation for us to understand him as creator. Reading the Bible, looking for bits of scientific knowledge, is like reading Robin Hood for tips on archery. Just because it's in there doesn't mean it's a how-to manual. Bible, being an ancient Near Eastern text, is largely focused on function, not on form. Does it work versus how does it work? Our modern minds tend to ask the question, how does it work? It's not how they thought. The Bible is addressing, does it work? 5 days a week, whether I like it or not, I'm an electrician. I can tell you two things. I can tell you that if you plug in your vacuum cleaner and flip the switch, it will turn on. Or I can begin to describe to you all the details surrounding AC theory, circuitry, electrical resistance, and so on. Which one of these responses is functionally useful? Which one of these responses would the Bible be giving? Ancient Near Eastern cultures, generally speaking, were more concerned with order. Did it work, or was it out of order? Chaos. I have a quote from the IVP Bible Background Commentary, Genesis 1, 9-19, if anyone, nobody's going to look at it. But they say, just as God is the one who set time in motion and set up the climate, he likewise is responsible for setting up all other aspects of human existence. The availability of water, the ability of the land to grow vegetation, the laws of agriculture, and the seasonal cycles. Each of God's creatures created with a role to play. All of this was ordered by God and was good, not tyrannical or threatening. This reflects the ancient understanding that the gods were responsible for setting up the system of operations. The functioning of the cosmos was much more important to the people of the ancient world than was its physical makeup or chemical composition. They described what they saw, and more important, what they experienced of the world as having been created by God. So from there, we're going to get to the text, I promise. From there, I want to take a very, very, very quick look at some of Israel's neighbors, just to get a flavor of their cultural context. Every ancient culture in the ancient Near East, well, everywhere else, had a mythology about creation. There's a story somewhere about where the world came from. In the ancient Near East, the general story of all of them is it starts with primeval chaos turned into an orderly creation by a god or gods. Darkness and deep waters are the beginning stage through everyone I could find, of these stories. These are terms of disorder, chaos, lacking function, not lacking material. Large seas are a picture, darkness and deep water, right? Large seas, to the ancient mind, and rightly so, are a picture of untamable and unconquerable power, something that man has no chance against. This is why it is the gods that calm the seas and bring order to chaos. In the Bible, it is Yehovah who creates order from the chaos. It's following the same theme, it's telling the same story, but it's doing it very differently. So, we're going to get into that too. Sorry for the extraordinarily long introduction, but it's needed. So there's a few cultural mythologies, neighboring mythologies that I want to focus on, again, very briefly. The first, the Ugaritic Baal cycle, that's Canaanite. Second is the Egyptian story, creation mythology, spit it out. And third is the Babylonian Enuma Elish, which is just another name for their creation story. So again, very quickly. In the Ugaritic Baal cycle, that is Canaanite. In the beginning, there was darkness, disorder, and chaos. Creator god El has finished creating his part. He stepped down from it. Baal Hadad, who is the primary deity of the story, you've heard of Baal before, rises up to make a name for himself. To prove superiority, Baal does battle with Yam, who is the god and personification of the sea. It's also the same word in Hebrew. You're probably familiar with the word Yam. Baal does battle with Yam and defeats him and establishes order from the defeated Yam, the defeated sea. Again, quickly, moving on. Egyptian. In the beginning, there was darkness and chaotic waters. This was called Nu, which I find hilarious, because in the beginning, there's only one thing. What are we going to call it? Let's call it Nu. Atum first created himself from the waters of Nu. He created first for himself a hill to stand on, and then he created Shu, the god of the air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture and mist. Shu and Tefnut were given the responsibility to create order and stability out of chaos. And the first thing they did to do that was they divided the light from the dark. Shu and Tefnut then produced Geb, who is the earth, and Nut, who is the sky or the heavens. But the two would not separate, therefore Shu, the god of the air, pushed Nut, the heavens, up above himself, above the air, to keep them separated. so they can fulfill their functions, thus creating order, the system that works. So if you do have a signal and you want to look up, you can Google image Egyptian cosmology and you'll see a picture of more or less the same thing I just described, with all these different gods, you know, literally being the sky and the land and separating them and so forth. It's visual aids help. I wish I had a projector, but no. So that's Egypt. Moving on. Babylon. Marduk, the primary deity of the story in Babylon, is in battle with Tiamat, who is again the personification of the waters or the seas, actually specifically the saltwater seas, who also represents primeval chaos. In this battle, Marduk blows a great wind to open the mouth of Tiamat in order to shoot an arrow into her body to slay her through the mouth. Tiamat is slain, and her serpentine body is, quote, split in two like a fish for drying. That's directly from the Enuma Elish Tablet 4. The two halves of her body is then used to create the heavens and the earth. I would love to have continued quoting the tablet, but it would take me like 10 minutes because it's really detailed. So just trust me. Babylonian Tiamat, the sea goddess, also likely, very likely, shares a linguistic root with the Hebrew word tehom, which is translated in the Tanakh as deep. I have a quote, because Craig told me to put sources. I have a quote from the Dictionary of Deities and Demons on the anagram Tiamat, just to illustrate the etymological connection between the two. Hebrew tehom is etymologically related to Akkadian titimat, which derives from an older Semitic root, thm, no vowels, known in Ugaritic and other Semitic languages as the designation of the sea. In Arabic, tihiyamat denotes the coastal plain along the southwestern and southern shores of the Arabian Peninsula. In Akkadian, the root is known in the female form titimtu or tamtu. I don't speak Akkadian, meaning the sea. The divine name Tiamat, especially well known in the Babylonian creation myth Enuma Elish, is the absolute state of the noun. All that scholarly jargon just to say that all these words in all these languages are related to one another. Tehom is the Hebrew word that we find in the Bible that's related to all of this. Tehom appears 36 times in the Hebrew text and is never used with a definite article, the, suggesting that it is intended to be understood as deep, proper noun, capital D, rather than the deep, the way our translations usually show it. This is an echo, I would say, my opinion, of the other mythologies. See, what's interesting though is the biblical usage can personify Tehom, like the other cultures do, but one thing that does starkly different is it does not deify it. Tehom, see, in all the other cultures, Tiamat or whatever, are presented as this great opposition to the hero god of the story. In the Bible, Tehom is presented as God's punching bag, often portrayed as being defeated by God over and over and over again. It's a literary device used to show the superiority of Yehovah by describing him in this familiar story. So with all this random information about Israel's cultural background, I'm sorry your brain already probably hurts.
It's dry.
Good. With all this random information about Israel's cultural background, what do we do with it? Why does any of this matter? These culturally recognized stories have found their way into the Bible in numerous places and ways. In the same way that a modern pastor or speaker might reference icons of culture that we all recognize, so also does the biblical text, and this is what we will explore next. So we're going to finally get into our Bible. Take a guess where we're going. Genesis 1.
I'm going to a Michigan event here.
So I'll give you guys a nice long while to find it. I know it's hard to find. We're going to skim through Genesis chapter 1. I'm not going to read every verse. I'm just going to look for things that are relevant to the discussion because there's just way too much information to hit absolutely everything. So Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, using the New King James, just putting that out there. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. The word is tehom. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So like all other perceptions of that era, the very first thing we find in creation is dark, chaotic waters. Formless and empty, tohu vavohu, primeval chaos, and lack of order. This is what our God starts with. Notice, and there might be differing opinions, and that's fine. But as I understand it, notice that there is already matter at the beginning of creation. Because Genesis 1 has no intention of explaining form, material, but rather function. How's it going to work? And the first thing we see is God sends out a ruach to conquer the waters, if I can use that word. Like Marduk blew a great wind, a great ruach, to the deified seas, Tiamat, and will then proceed to divide them. We're already seeing echoes of familiarity to other cultures. We're just going to keep moving through. Genesis 1, 3-5. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day. This is Yehovah beginning to organize the creation, the universe, delineating what should be where. How's this system going to work? Recall, as I already mentioned, the Egyptian narrative of Shu and Tefnut, that when they were tasked with giving order to creation, the very first thing they also did was organize light and darkness by separating them. It's the same verbiage here. Keeping going. Genesis 1, 6-7. Then God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." Thus God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. So God divided the waters. Like Tiamat, as already mentioned, was divided and conquered and divided. And like Baal defeated Yam. We've heard this story before, right? Except this time, this is where it gets interesting. Yehovah is not contested. There's no opposition. The difference in the stories is what is striking, not the similarity. Similarity is only valuable in that it provides a context to the differences. So we've heard this story before, we know what we're looking at, and we know what's supposed to come next. Oh wait, that's not what came next. Yehovah is the true hero of creation. This is clear messaging to both the Hebrews and the pagans. In a way that is so starkly different from all the other stories about all the other chief gods that had to struggle and fight, and maybe they're not going to make it. Yehovah speaks, creation happens, there is no opposition. I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, Genesis 1, 9-10. Then God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, Eretz, and the gathering together of the water he called seas, Yam. And God saw that it was good. It was good. This is a good time to mention the word good. Anybody know Hebrew, the word good? Tov. Okay, we've heard that before. I think it's on the board, wasn't it? I don't know.
Yeah.
We've been singing it.
Yeah, exactly. We translate, generally, in English translations, we translate the word tov as good. But it's more than just good. You know, it's good, but with a different nuance. Really, it's good in the sense of functional. It works. It does what it's designed to do. So this is something you hear over and over and over again in Genesis. God did a thing, and it's tov. It works. This is language of creation order, of organizing the universe. So anyway, I digress. God said, the waters be gathered together in one place, and it was so, and it was good, and all that stuff. So again, recall back to Egypt, Atum creates for himself land to stand on, and then the very god of the land himself, Yep. And also like Tiamat is formed into the earth, and the rest into the skies from Babylon. The Genesis account here is I guess I'll say the word response to the common creation myths of the time period. Using this language loosely, a parallel account to the other creations myths, but in a, But in Genesis, again, there's no war, there's no battle, there's no contest. Yehovah is entirely uncontested. He speaks and creation obeys every single time until he creates man, but that's a different story. Ugaritic, that is Canaanite, literature also includes a figure that is called either Lotan, Litan, or Litanu, any of those names. I'm going to go with Lotan because I feel like it. Lotan was a servant of the sea god, Yam. Lotan was an extension, thus thus, of the image of watery chaos like Yam was. Lotan was depicted as a sea serpent that inhabited the chaotic waters and epitomized chaos itself. Sometime later in history, it is, as things developed, because this myth existed for a long time, it was eventually depicted with 7 heads, which we might be familiar with the idea of a hydra. That's where it comes from. This is also a parallel to the Babylonian mythology, which already, as one being, depicts Tiamat as a serpentine figure. So anyway, we have this great picture of the sea serpent. It's the epitomization of the chaotic waters that ancient peoples understood as the opposition of order. So, who cares? The linguistic equivalent in the Hebrew language between Lotan and Tiamat, well, not, okay, linguistic equivalent to Lotan, not so much Tiamat, but anyway, is Leviathan, or more recognizably to those who speak English, Leviathan. We're all familiar with Leviathan in famous places like Job 41, obviously, but Leviathan shows up in a lot of places in the Bible, and I think a lot of times when we read it, we just look at it and go, and move on. So I want to look at a handful of places, and again, there's way too many to look at all of them. I want to look at a handful of places where we see Leviathan, where I think people just skim over it. So Psalm 74, I'll give you guys a second, verse 12. Psalm 74, 12. We're going to go through 14. For God is my king from of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. Yeah, sounds good. Okay. You divided the seas by your strength. Okay, sounds good. You broke the heads of the sea serpents in the waters. What? I didn't read that in Genesis. You broke the heads of Leviathan in pieces, and you gave him as food to the people inhabiting the wilderness. Notice the plural of heads, too, by the way. This is not describing a historical event where God defeated a sea monster. That's not the point. The psalmist is using recognizable imagery to describe Yehovah as the champion of creation in a story that everybody already knew. We'll look at one more. Isaiah 27:1. 27:1. Again, there's a bunch of these, and they're fun, but we don't have that kind of time. In that day, Yehovah with his severe sword, great and strong, will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, Leviathan, that twisted serpent, and he will slay the Tanin that is in the sea. I don't know what your translation has, but Tanin is the Hebrew word. We're going to come back to this. I just want to make sure you bookmark this in your head. Anyway, another quote from the Dictionary of Deities and Demons that became an extremely relevant resource for this topic, so I'm sorry it's in here a lot. The biblical texts consider, they say, Yahweh's mastering of Leviathan as an aspect of creational order, although neither necessarily in terms of creatio prima, I don't speak Latin, or cosmogony, nor in terms of combat. So in English, that means the Bible is using the language of God defeating Leviathan in the sense of creating order. That part is similar, but not in the sense of the way he created the world, the initial creation, nor in the sense of the origins of physical matter, nor in terms of a great divine battle. It's using the same familiar language in a starkly different way. Okay, back on track, back to Genesis 1. I hope you should be able to find it. Verse 16, then God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. On the 4th day, God created the sun, the moon, and the stars, which right off the bat, I just want to point out, this is clearly demarcating himself as superior to all these other celestial deities, the sun, moon, and stars, that the other nations worshipped. Notice also how he affixed them, the sun, moon, and stars, to the rakia, the firmament of the skies. The ancients understood the skies as a solid object. And again, I'm not saying the skies are a solid object. I'm saying the ancients understood the skies as a solid object. Yehovah never tries to correct that underlying belief. This is not the point he's trying to make. Real quickly, you don't have to turn there, but Job 37:18, I think it's Eliphaz, says to Job, with him have you spread out the skies, strong as a cast metal mirror? That's about as hard as it gets. In the King James Version and others, the New King James, probably some other ones, I forgot to look, use the English word firmament, meaning, in English, a firm thing. So with that in mind, I want you to just, in your head, compare that to the Egyptian Egyptian depictions of Nut. If you happen to look up the image of the Egyptian mythology, that would help. The goddess who is the physical sky. There's the goddess arched over the top of creation, above the air, with stars and moons and stuff stuck to her. We have the same familiar picture, and I'm not saying that there is a physically, a solid object up in the air. I'm not saying that. Don't take it that way. I'm saying the ancients understood these images and these stories, these characters, and they're using this language to express God's revelation to them. Genesis 1:20-21. Then God said, "Let the waters abound with an abundance of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of the heavens." So God created great tanin, there's our word again, and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded, according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Just curious, real question. What does your translation say that God created in verse 21? God created great what?
Sea monsters.
Sea creatures.
Okay, see, there's a lot of variety here.
The other place where you said that word, mine had said monsters, but this place says creatures, so it's not consistent.
It's not consistent, because the translators are uncomfortable with putting sea serpents in the text. Can't imagine why. That's what the word means, though. I just let the cat out of the bag, sorry. On the fifth day, God created tanin. The word means sea serpents or dragons, if you want to use that. Let's look at another verse real quick. I guess you could turn there if you want. Psalm 104:24. (24 to 26). Psalm 104:24 to 26. O Yehovah, how manifold are your works! In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your possessions. All right, sounds good. This great and wide sea, in which are innumerable teeming things, living things, both small and great. Yeah, it's wonderful. There the ships sail about, and there is that Leviathan, which you have made to play there. In the foreign creation stories, the sea serpent, the tanin, the Leviathan, is a formidable opponent, fearful, dreadful. In the biblical version of the story, Leviathan is not a fearsome foe, but God's rubber ducky, playing in his bathtub. Job 41:5. You don't have to turn there. Will you play with Leviathan as with a bird? This is God asking Job questions. It's the end of the story. Will you play with Leviathan as with a bird? Or will you leash him for your little girls? With the implication of, I know you can't, Job, but I can.
Yeah.
Back to Genesis 1:26 to 28. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God made man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." This, and I haven't gotten to this before, and I will in the future. This is going to be I think it's probably my next thing. But this is starkly contrasted against pretty much every other culture's mythology about the creation of man. Other mythologies describe the creation of man as an insignificant nothing moment where the gods got tired of farming, and so they created something that would do it for them. The Tanakh, however, describes the creation of man as a high-status event, not as menial slaves. Man is made in the, quote, image of God. The word image is tselem. It means image. Surprise. But it often is used in other places in the Bible, translated, well, still translated image, but it's used in the context, in the sense of an idol. Quote from IVP, "In the ancient world, an image was believed to carry the essence of that which it represented. An idol image of a deity, the same terminology as used here, would be used in worship of the deity because it contained the deity's essence. This would not suggest that the image could do what the deity could do, nor that it looked the same as the deity. Rather, the deity's work was thought to be accomplished through the idol, the tselem. In similar ways, the governing work of God was seen to be accomplished by people. This is what image means. This is one place where Genesis is just polar opposite to their neighboring cultures, and that is not an accident. And there is a lot more to discuss here next time. Don't have another hour. So at this point, we've pretty much gotten to the end of Genesis 1. Jehovah has organized that which was unordered. He separates the waters, the land, the sea, put them in the proper place. He creates inhabitants for his creation and puts them exactly where they belong. Very intentional. Lastly, he puts man as the officer over creation to continue to maintain order. God speaks to his people and says, I am the one who brings the order, the sole creator. See, to our God, there is no contest, no comparison, just a divine artist making happy little trees. So, we made it through Genesis 1. I have a few more things I want to show you, but I want to pause and say I hope you're seeing, as we've gone through Genesis and some of the other places that I've referenced, hope you're seeing why the nerdiness is relevant. Learning all these things helps us get into their shoes, see through their eyes, understand the text the way they did 4,000 years ago. Are you guys seeing that so far?
Yeah.
I haven't freaked anybody out too much?
No.
Okay, good.
You are pretty quick.
Yeah. It doesn't take much to freak Jacks now. So I want to just very quickly skim through the rest of the Bible, some major events where we can see this pattern again, because if anyone's ever read the Bible before, more than once especially, you've probably noticed that it has this tendency to tell a story and then tell it again with different characters, and then again and again and again and again. This is no exception. First thing I want to look at, we don't have to go too far, and I'm not going to have you turn there because I've probably taken way too much time already, is the flood. I trust, as we go through this survey of the Bible and some of these major events, I trust that you have all some familiarity with these stories, because I just simply don't have time to read all of them. The flood. The story of the flood, we have at the beginning, the way things are supposed to be. There's the waters above and the waters below, according to the text, the way they saw things. The flood begins, and the waters above come down, the waters below come up, and they rejoin. Creation is beginning to be undone. Tehom is beginning to leave its organization, its proper place, and rejoin above and below. Plants and animals are removed from the land. The land is then swallowed up by the chaotic seas. Again, we have the picture of Tehom, and all that had the breath of the spirit of life died. This is creation rewound. Then God caused a ruach to pass over the surface of the waters. The waters cease to flow from above and below and begin to recede back to where they belong. Then Noah sends out a bird who finds a plant to reveal that the land is dry. This is creation redone. And at the very end of it, and this is not a coincidence, I have to say, the ark rested on the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month. Come on. The flood is a story of creation being undone, swallowed up by the chaos waters, and then the chaos waters being subdued again. A recreation. Next one. I'm gonna ask, what is the next major event with water? Like big scale.
Red Sea.
Red Sea.
You drink it.
You don't drink that much water. So looking at the Red Sea, and again, you don't have to turn there, you can if you'd like, but I'm just going to skim through it. After Egypt is systematically decreated, and that's another discussion I'm not going to touch on right now, Israel leaves and is confronted by Tehom. The word is used there as well. God then divides the Tehom into, using a ruach, using spirit wind, creating order from chaos, and allowing the Israelites to pass through the body of the conquered Tehom. Shortly after, Exodus 15, they're singing this song. They say, with the blast of your nostrils, the waters were gathered together. The flood stood upright like a heap. Tehomot. congealed in the heart of the sea. Remember the Babylonian Tiamat? It's the same story. Sea is defeated, parted, and they pass through it. On track, stay on track. Isaiah 51, 9 to 10. You can turn there if you'd like. Isaiah 51, 9 to 10. Isaiah 51, 9 to 10. Awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of Jehovah. Awake as in the ancient days, in the generations of old. Are you not the arm that cut Rahab apart and wounded the serpent? Are you not the one who dried up the sea, the waters of the great Tehom deep, and made the depths of the sea a road for the redeemed to cross over? Tehom obeys here the will of Jehovah. Tehom swallows up Pharaoh and the Egyptian army. Now we're getting a twist on the story. Instead of God just easily defeating Tehom, now he's using Tehom as a servant. Exodus 15:5, Tehom has covered them, Pharaoh. They sank to the bottom like a stone. Yet another quote from the Dictionary of Deities and Demons, Isaiah 51, 9 to 10. In Isaiah 51, 9 to 10, the reference to, again, they say Yahweh, as victor in the battle in the days of old, quote, against the monsters of chaos is used, just as in the Ugaritic myth of Baal, as a reason for hope in the present situation. This victory can be repeated in new situations of distress. The prophet has associated the creation of heaven and earth out of oceans of chaos with the deliverance of the people of Israel out of Egypt through the waters of the Reed Sea. The God of Israel is called upon to repeat such an act of salvation on behalf of the peoples of Judah living in exile by the rivers of Babylon. So we see Isaiah is saying, remember how way back when you defeated the sea serpent, and remember how you did it again when we left Egypt? Do it again, because we're being taken captive. Be our salvation. He's using this motif on so many layers. And after they get through after they get through the Red Sea, Israel was then brought through the divided seas to the holy mountain of God, which is a picture of Eden, which is another teaser for something I'm going to get at in the future. Just keep that in your brain for later.
Can you repeat that again?
Sorry. After they
The reference, sorry. The last reference, yeah.
Exodus 15:5.
After Isaiah,
Exodus
your
15:5.
next one.
there wasn't one.
Oh, it wasn't? Oh, okay, sorry. Thought you did, sorry.
There was Exodus 15:5 a while ago. Was that it?
No, you're
Okay.
right. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a quote from the Dictionary of Deities and Demons. Is that it?
Don't worry about it.
Good. Anyway. So.
Teaser, pick up from the teaser.
Oh, I was done, but I just wanted to point out that as they came through the waters of chaos, the divided body of the waters of chaos, they went then to the mountain of God, which is a picture of Eden, which is another parallel that I'm going to get to in the future. Not today. Okay, what's like the pinnacle of Bible stories? What's the most important figure in the Bible? Do you think maybe he has some echoes of this type? There's a famous story that even if you've never read the Bible, you've probably heard something of. The disciples and Yeshua are out on a boat in a lake. Yeshua is sleeping in the bottom of the boat on a pillow. A huge storm, no, that's relevant too though. A huge storm comes across the sea. The disciples are freaking out. We're going to die. Don't you care? Are you going to do anything about this? And so Yeshua wakes up, looks at the wind and the waves, and says, peace, be still. Literally in the Greek, actually, it's be silent and be muzzled, which is not something one normally says to an inanimate object. That is something one might in fact say to a beast. This is Yeshua telling the seas to fall in line, the chaos to cease, and may things come into order again. This was not just a parlor trick. This wasn't just Yeshua saying, look what I can do. This is Yeshua making a very bold statement about himself, and the disciples didn't miss it. This is the one who has the authority to command primeval chaos to fall in line to his order. This is a very recognizable story to the disciples. They've heard this before. This is, if I may, this is Yeshua wearing the one ring. This is Yeshua wielding the force. We've heard this story before. And this is why the disciples respond with, "Who is this guy that even the winds and the waves obey him?" Never seen that before. By the way, at this point I want to point out something that I think probably has nagged a lot of people as I've spoken. This event with Yeshua literally happened, historically happened. And I would say that all these other things that we looked at are of the same. I don't believe that the Bible is giving us false history. But I think we need to recognize, again, looking through their eyes, seeing, the world through in their shoes, we need to look at Genesis and the rest of the Bible, not primarily as historical narrative the way we like to think of things, where this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. We should first look at its theological intent of the things that it gives us. We see the events described through the and we will see the events described through the eyes of the ancient people that were both the original authors and audience. I already said that. I hope that made sense. I got a little jumbled there. Okay, one more thing I want to look at. The very end of the Bible. The end of days. Remember Isaiah 27:1? I'm going to go there again. If you want to go there again, you don't have to. Isaiah 27:1. In that day, Yehovah with a severe sword, great and strong, will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent. Leviathan, that twisted serpent. And he will slay the Tanim that is in the sea. At the end of time, Yehovah will subdue chaos utterly and completely. Where might we see that again? Where might that be represented again? Revelation 21:1. I'm just going to keep going. You can go if you want. Revelation 21:1, John says, "Now I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first earth and the first heaven had passed away. Also, there was no more sea." The biblical story ends with the chaotic seas so thoroughly overthrown that it is completely non-existent. Revelation, I would argue, is not giving us a primarily, quote-unquote, historical, I don't know if you can say historical about future events, but a historical account, but is giving us theological messaging. Chaos is so completely subdued that every inch of creation is in complete submission to Yehovah, finally. So who cares? All this stuff, who cares?
Yeah, who cares?
Yeah.
I do.
I hope by now you have seen that the biblical language is just packed, and again, this is just a tip of the iceberg, packed with allusions to the ancient Near Eastern mythologies and what was in the back of their heads. The real question now, so what? Why does it matter? Well, the first thing I would have to say, it matters because when the biblical text is examined in light of its ancient contemporaries, it is abundantly clear that there are intentional similarities. Therefore, it behooves us to figure out why the scripture is employing these themes and what we are supposed to learn from them. It is way too specific and way too numerous to count these things off as coincidence. So how are we to understand the language of the biblical text? I think that we should recognize the language used here not as literal descriptions of God defeating Leviathan, but rather in the same way that we might hear a Bible teacher or anybody else today use a culturally recognized icon to illustrate their point. One might reference Darth Vader or Gandalf or Bugs Bunny or any other number of unanimously recognized cultural icons to describe in brief and vivid detail the elements of their subject matter. So, to wrap it up, the Bible, and in particular the creation, again, was not written in a cultural vacuum. The text is speaking to an ancient people that already has this picture in their minds, and it would greatly improve our ability to comprehend the text if we also have the same image in our minds. The ancient world is full of mythologies and legends that share much in common with the Genesis account, and by extension, the rest of the scriptures. What's intriguing, though, again, about Genesis is not what it has in common with these mythologies as much as it is where it stands different. The differences are the significant parts, because the section wasn't composed to give a photographic description of the historical events. It was composed to describe a theological message. We have a tendency in our culture to read things, anything, but specifically Genesis, the way we look at a photograph. expecting a detailed account of a material creation of things. Genesis, I would argue, is not a photograph. Genesis is a work of Picasso. It's artwork. Some parts are recognizable, others are surprising. And because it has elements in places that one would not expect, it causes us to ask the question, well, why is there an eye on a chin? Why is the nose upside down? I hope you guys know what Picasso looks like. Why is this like this? It's not supposed to be like this. When we see the text in this way, we can explore the answers to the questions the author wants us to ask. John Calvin said once that God lisps to us in his word. There's a little bit of a cultural gap because when he used the word lisp, it means like baby talk. God spoke to us in ways we can understand. He says this, I am the great and powerful God who is in no contest with anyone. I am the God of gods, the Lord of lords. I have complete control and authority over my creation. By the way, I am not just the king of the universe, I am your king. I have chosen you to be my image. Next time I speak, I don't know when that is, probably not soon, we will be exploring the ancient context of the image of God. For now, grace and peace, Shabbat Shalom.